Life has a way of testing us, pushing us to our limits, and teaching us valuable lessons through the most unexpected circumstances. Today, I'm sharing my story of betrayal, revenge, and the strength I found within myself when everything seemed to fall apart. It's a journey that begins with a decision, a sacrifice, and ends with the power to reclaim what's rightfully yours. If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's deceit, this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel to start today's story. And don't forget to hit the bell for new updates. I had been married to David for 6 years. At the time, everything seemed perfect. We lived in a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, nestled on the outskirts of Chicago, and life felt stable, predictable, and comfortable. I had a steady job in finance, and I was the primary breadwinner in our household. David, on the other hand, always had big dreams but couldn't seem to hold onto a stable job. He called himself an entrepreneur, but it was always my income that paid the mortgage, covered the bills, and funded his latest business ventures. I never really minded that much. Love has a way of blinding you to the signs. I played the supportive wife, believing that it was just a temporary phase, that things would get better for him. After all, love isn't about counting the financial contributions, right? It's about supporting each other, being a team, and sharing everything, good and bad. Or so I thought. Then, one day, everything changed. David's mother, Susan, needed emergency surgery. She had been diagnosed with a severe medical condition, and the surgery was essential for her survival. The hospital bills were overwhelming. Over $80. Susan and I had never been close. In fact, our relationship was strained at best. She often made snide remarks about my career, my background, and the fact that I wasn't able to give her the grandchildren she was so eager to dote on. We didn't see eye to eye on much, but I tried to be civil. David, however, was desperate. He told me, with pleading eyes, that he couldn't lose his mother. "She's my mom," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't let her die." I didn't want to help. I knew how difficult things were between Susan and me, and I also knew that this wasn't my responsibility. But David was so emotional, so vulnerable, and for some reason, my heart ached for him. He wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for his mother, the woman who had raised him. He didn't have the money to cover the cost, and neither did Susan. The only person who could make this happen was me. So, I did it. I paid the entire bill. I covered every single cent. In my mind, it was for David, because I loved him. And I thought we were in this together. I convinced myself that this was the right thing to do, despite the resentment I felt towards Susan and the doubts that nagged at me. I told myself that love meant sacrifice, that sometimes you had to put your own feelings aside for the greater good. Susan's surgery was a success. She recovered quickly, and the relief I felt at seeing her healthy again was overshadowed by the sinking feeling in my chest. I had done something huge, something selfless, but deep down, I could sense that something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like a shift had occurred, like I had handed over control of something I couldn't get back. A few weeks later, I came home from work, exhausted but content. I expected to find David on the couch, maybe watching TV or reading, like he always did. But when I walked through the door, I froze. There, in the middle of our living room, were my bags, packed, sitting neatly by the door. David was sitting on the couch, his arms crossed over his chest, his face unreadable. He didn't greet me, didn't say anything at all. He just stared at me with that cold, emotionless look I had never seen before. Beside him stood Susan, her face twisted into a smirk, her arms crossed in a way that made her seem even more dismissive than usual. I blinked, trying to make sense of the scene before me, but the words that followed hit me like a slap in the face. "We don't need you anymore," David said, his tone flat, his eyes cold. It wasn't even the words that stung the most, it was the way he said them. Like I was just some inconvenience to him. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Susan laughed. A cruel, mocking laugh. "You were just a wallet to us, dear." And then it hit me. the gut-wrenching realization. This had all been a scheme. A plan that I had walked right into without even knowing it. They had used me. I had been nothing more than a means to an end. I don't even remember what I said. I think I was in shock. But I remember grabbing my suitcase and walking out, trying to hold it together as they continued to laugh behind me. I didn't look back as I left the house we had built together. The tears came later, sitting in the back of an Uber, then alone in a cheap hotel room. But even through the tears, one thought kept looping in my mind: I should have known better. As I sat in that hotel room, still processing the shocking betrayal, my emotions oscillated between disbelief and a quiet sense of realization. The humiliation, the feeling of being discarded, and the anger that bubbled up inside me were overwhelming. But amidst the turmoil, there was something else, something more empowering. I wasn't just some helpless victim. I had been too trusting, too blinded by love and loyalty. But now I could see things clearly. And as the minutes ticked by, I began to hatch a plan, one that would make them pay for what they had done. The thing that David and Susan didn't realize was that I had covered more than just the hospital bill. I had arranged the payments with the hospital in a very specific way. Since I was the one covering the full $80, the hospital had offered me a special contract. This agreement made me solely responsible for the debt. But it also had a crucial detail: they didn't know that if I failed to pay, the responsibility would fall directly on Susan. I had made the first payment before everything went down. But now, as I sat there alone, I felt no sense of charity left for them. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic payments. A sense of calm washed over me as I did it. This was the moment of power. The moment where I took control of the situation. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their greed and manipulation. The calls started almost immediately. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from David, followed by a flood of angry texts. I let them all go to voicemail, feeling an eerie sense of satisfaction as their frustration grew. They were panicking. The hospital had called them to explain that the debt was now Susan's responsibility. They were desperate, and I wasn't going to answer. I was done with them. For a while, it felt like the weight of their betrayal had been lifted from my shoulders. But they weren't done with me. Far from it. An hour later, David's voice echoed through the voicemail, trembling with panic. "What have you done? The hospital's saying my mom is responsible now. You need to fix this. I can't believe you'd do this to us after everything we did for you." I let the message sit there, untouched. Then, another call, and then another from Susan. By the next morning, David was banging on my hotel door. His face was flushed with panic, and I couldn't help but feel a little smug as I opened the door just enough to see him. His voice wavered as he demanded I fix the situation. "The hospital is saying my mom has to pay, or they'll send it to collections. You have to help us." I wasn't moved by his pleas. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at him, calm as could be. "Not my problem," I said simply. His face reddened, frustration building in his chest as he stepped back. "Please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You promised to pay for her surgery." I cut him off before he could finish. "No, I promised to pay for my wife's mother's surgery. I'm not your wife anymore," I said firmly, and I shut the door in his face. Later that day, I received more calls, and texts, and endless attempts at apologizing. But I wasn't feeling the need to fix things. No, I had made a decision. And I was going to let them deal with the consequences of their actions. Susan was left to fight the hospital, who had made it clear that if she didn't pay, the debt would be sent to collections. She tried to fight it, claiming that she hadn't understood the contract. But the hospital didn't care. They had her signature, and the paperwork was legally binding. It didn't take long for Susan's financial world to come crashing down. Her credit was destroyed, and the collection calls started flooding in. She was forced to sell her car, and even her jewelry, in an attempt to pay off the debt. But nothing seemed to stop the inevitable. As for David, he seemed to be caught between his mother's mounting anger and his own helplessness. They had underestimated me, and now, it was time for them to pay the price. In the end, the tables had turned. I didn't feel guilty, not in the least. It had been their greed, their manipulation, and their disregard for me that had led to this. They were getting exactly what they deserved. And I was watching it all unfold with a sense of calm satisfaction. I wasn't done yet, though. This was just the beginning. The next phase of my plan was already in motion. As the weeks passed, life seemed to settle into a strange, almost peaceful rhythm. The constant tension that had been suffocating me for so long was finally gone. I was free. I had a new apartment. A cozy place with a stunning view of the city. And a small dog that I quickly grew attached to. It was the beginning of my new life. One where I could breathe freely again without the weight of David and Susan's expectations hanging over me. But freedom, I soon realized, came with its own set of challenges. David and Susan were not going to let me go so easily. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were just from unknown numbers. I ignored them. Then, they began escalating. Silent calls, followed by heavy breathing on the other end of the line. And eventually, Susan's voice screeching threats into the phone. "You'll regret this," she would scream. "You think you've won? You haven't." I blocked the numbers, but that didn't stop them. Soon after, the social media attacks started. Fake accounts popped up, leaving hurtful messages on my profile, calling me a thief, a liar, a homewrecker. The rumors spread like wildfire, with people I didn't even know messaging my friends, trying to tear down everything I had worked for. They even tried to contact my boss, hoping to get me fired from my job. But none of it worked. It only pissed me off. Then, one night, I came home late, exhausted from the day, only to find a figure standing outside my building. I froze for a moment before realizing who it was. It was David. He looked awful, unshaven, eyes hollow with exhaustion, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate vulnerability I had never seen in him before. I tightened my grip on my keys, ready to defend myself if I needed to, and walked straight past him. "Wait," he called out, his voice cracking. "We need to talk." I didn't stop. "We don't have anything to talk about," I replied coldly, my steps never faltering. But David grabbed my arm, pulling me back. His touch felt like a shock to my skin, and I yanked my arm away from him. Disgusted. "You don't care, do you?" he asked, his voice filled with desperation. His head dropped as he rubbed his face. "My mom's credit is wrecked. The hospital sent everything to collections. They're hounding her. She can't even apply for a goddamn credit card now." "Not my problem," I said, my voice unwavering. There was a part of me that was almost tempted to feel sympathy for him. But that part was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming sense of betrayal I had been living with for so long. David's face turned red with anger. "You promised to help her," he yelled, his voice rising. "She's your family too." I shook my head. "No, I promised to help my wife's mother. I'm not your wife anymore," I said, and with that, I turned and walked away. The worst part was that Susan didn't give up. She tried to fight back, claiming she wasn't responsible for the debt, insisting that I had tricked her into signing the papers. But the hospital didn't care about her excuses. The paperwork was legally binding, and she was the one who was stuck with the debt. Desperation set in for Susan. She couldn't afford to pay, so she was forced to sell her car, her jewelry, anything she could to make ends meet. I could almost feel her panic from a distance. But I wasn't going to rescue her. I had already done more than enough. Then came the phone call that I had been waiting for. David, calling to apologize. "Mom's sick over this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She's stressed. She can't sleep." I didn't feel sorry for them. "Tell her to ask her wallet for help," I said and hung up. It was the last time I would hear from David for a while. But Susan and David weren't done with me. No, their consequences were only just beginning. And I had every intention of making sure they felt the full weight of their actions. Months passed, and the storm that had been my life with David and Susan began to settle into calm. But their attempts to break me never truly ceased. I had won my battles. But they were still plotting, still scheming, They couldn't accept that I had left them behind, walking away from their manipulation and betrayal. Yet, I knew deep down that they had destroyed themselves. Not because of me, but because of their own greed and cruelty. They had underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake. As for me, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I embraced my newfound independence, focusing on my career and the relationships that truly mattered. I found peace in the simple things, like sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, reflecting on the lessons learned. Life had taught me something profound, no matter how deep the betrayal. The power to rise above always lies within us. David's phone call months later was a hollow reminder of everything that had unfolded. He had lost everything, his wealth, his home, even Rachel, who had left him when she discovered the lies. I didn't feel sorry for him. I had let go, and with that, I had gained everything that mattered, my freedom, my strength, and the respect I had earned through my resilience. David and Susan were still dealing with the consequences of their actions. But as I watched my new life unfold, I couldn't help but smile. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with them. Thank you for following my story. If you want more life stories and lessons from the journey of self-discovery, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the latest updates.